As you know, I'm Nick Shell, and all I ever talk about is hair loss. And as you also know, one of the things that makes a guy cool is that he helps other people. And that's exactly what I'm going to do today, is I'm going to help you, I'm going to help myself also, have a better understanding on exactly what counts as a receding hairline versus a maturing hairline. It's just so dizzying. But we have a good friend who subscribes to our channel named Robert, who should have his own channel, but instead I am able to reap the success of the garden he never picks the fruit of. That doesn't make any sense. But here's what Robert did. You can find all of this in the comment section of the video I made called, "Is a receding hairline worse than thinning?" So check out the comments. There's a lot of comments between Robert back and forth of him helping me understand. Here's the hairline versus receding hairline versus thinning for dummies, however you want to call that. Here's how it works. Norwood 1. Norwood 1 is little to no recession. Temples, sideways on your head. Norwood 1, also known as juvenile hairline, which Robert pointed out that even a lot of boys don't even have this. And I've seen this. I've seen it at my son's school. I've seen 8, 9, 10-year-olds. They don't even have that hairline. They're actually maybe even closer to a 2 or 3 sometimes. I've seen it. I've seen it. He goes on to say Norwood 1.5 to 2, that is when there's some recession at the hairline corners, which some would call a mature hairline. So after there's the juvenile hairline with barely any receding maybe on the sides, then we're going into 1.5 and we're going into 2. And that is the mature hairline. It's apparently a phrase that's used out of context a lot, of maturing hairline, which I don't have. And let's get to what I have, because the maturing hairline is that V. Norwood 1.5 to 2 is going to have the letter V on your as a hairline. All right, but anything beyond that V, anything beyond the Norwood 2, is considered male pattern baldness, which is me, which is a Norwood 3. So an easier way to maybe break it down is this. Norwood 1 to 2, what is that? Maturing. So in between Norwood 1, from Norwood 1, it was more of a kind of a straighter cross, but maybe receding here, up to the V. But that process going on, that is maturing. The next stage would be receding, which is classified by Robert, the expert, a 2.5 to a 3.5. So 2.5 is when the 90-degree angles, where what starts the V up here and up here, is starting to break away and become more of a circular into where it eventually is in the end. I think most people would say I'm definitely a solid 3, but then the thinning kind of changes things up, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But ultimately, receding hairline would be a 2.5 as those corners are starting to break up, to a 3.5, which arguably maybe I'm getting closer to there myself, because it's when this peninsula is starting to break off a little bit, because Norwood 4 would be the island. So anything that would be Norwood 4, which is going to include the island has broken off and then there's an obvious balding spot in the back, that's when you're at Norwood 4, and that's balding. Now, as Robert points out, there's a wild card that we have to consider, and that is diffuse thinning and crown lumps. That's when, like for example, you could be in Norwood 1, but if your hair was super thin to the same degree that a 65-year-old man's was, where he barely has any hair on top of there, who cares about your hairline if it's that thin? And there's also something called crown lumps, which I'm not personally familiar with, but from what I can understand, there's just smaller balder spots under crown, from what I can understand. So that's kind of this version of this for dummies like me. Robert is the one who should be talking about this, but instead he passes the torch to me and says, Nick, be my spokesman. I'm going to stay in Seattle doing my thing, writing the blog, but Nick, I need you to be my spokesman, to explain to everyone who's trying to understand all this. Now, Robert says it's simple. I still think it's complicated, and even as I'm making this video, reading his notes, I'm still a little bit confused, but let's do one last review to dumb it down. A maturing hairline is Norwood 1 to 2. A receding hairline is Norwood 2.5 to 3.5, and balding is anything Norwood 4 or beyond. But then again, there's the wild card of diffuse thinning or crown lumps. Who cares about your hairline if it's so thin you're looking at your scalp? Then you're basically the equivalent, in theory, of whatever the thinning has taken you to. So, if I got any of that wrong, our good friend Robert will be happy to correct me in the comment section. But this is my attempt to understand this better, and if I can understand it better, hopefully you can too. I'm Nick Shell, and I'll only ever talk about hair loss, but here's a secret. I've got another YouTube channel called Family Friendly Daddy Blog. If you want to hear me talk about stuff that's not about hair loss and just want a break, go to that channel, Family Friendly Daddy Blog. It's still the same me, still the same person, just on that channel I talk about hair loss 0%. On this I talk about 100%. There's the difference.